We are a working class community. We are hard workers, we're diligent, we're honest, and we're also resilient. We have so much to offer.
Welcome back to On the Record here on Queen City News Plus. I'm Chief Political Correspondent Andy Weber. Today we're diving into recent immigration enforcement operations seen across the city of Charlotte, as well as a new congressional map that was passed by the General Assembly in Raleigh that could affect the balance of power in Congress. First up, our interview with Councilmember J.D. Masuera-Arias, who represents east parts of the city, and the impact his neighborhood saw during that week-long Border Patrol deployment. Let's first start off with, how would you describe the events we saw about 2 weeks ago in your district?
There's really one word that comes to mind, and that is devastating. We saw fear happen, we saw uncertainty happen. We also saw an economic devastation, right? We had small businesses, not only across District 5 and the Central Avenue and Sharon Amity and Albemarle Road and W.T. Harris corridors, but we also saw it happen in South Charlotte on South Boulevard, where businesses closed. Charlotte East, the nonprofit that's located in East Charlotte, surveyed over 75 businesses that reported $2,500 in daily losses, sometimes even as high as $5,000. And so what we saw was really a state of confusion, a state of fear, and a state of uncertainty for a lot of community members, not only the immigrant community, but folks that are proud to call themselves green card holders, permanent residents, and U.S. citizens.
How did your job as council member-elect and now council member change in those weeks before you're even in the office?
Well, yeah, I think what I quickly realized was that voters are smart enough to know that we live in a Dillon rule state, meaning that our state legislature limits what local municipalities can and cannot do. But what they were really asking for was for elected officials to not only make statements and press releases or press conferences, but to stand by them and with them during these moments. And so I made it a point to stand every night outside of Manolo's Bakery, located in the heart of District 5, and stand alongside the children of immigrants, young people who peacefully protested these events and this operation that was violating our constitutional rights in the streets of East Charlotte.
Yeah, we just showed some video of those operations that we saw in Charlotte. How would you describe the way Border Patrol operated during that about week period in the city?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned it in one of my videos that I posted on social media. They really move fast and I compare them to ghosts. You would hear about them, you would hear a reported sighting, and then when you would get there, or when I would get there, they would be gone, right? And they had already taken somebody off the street. And I think Border Patrol is interesting, though, because they're trained to operate in a very military fashion, protecting the country's borders. So their approaches are a little bit more aggressive, less accountable. And we saw that happen in the city of Charlotte, which is diverse and, quite frankly, not a border city. I think when we talk about law enforcement, we need to enforce the law, yes, but how you do it matters, and how it was done and operated were violating people's constitutional rights. We saw folks, particularly Latino, Hispanic individuals, get racially profiled because of how they looked, where they worked, and if they spoke Spanish or English. And so it was very devastating to see that our country has, fallen back to that degree of really violating constitutional rights, not only of those that are non-documented, but also those that rightfully have U.S. citizenship.
Now, it did seem about 2 to 3 days into the operation, there was a form of resistance. Peaceful, but there was resistance from the city. I was at Safeway Foods. I saw volunteers and store employees locking doors when they saw CBP and helping folks stay inside. Did that response surprise you?
You know what? I'm not sure if it necessarily surprised me, but I did take note of it because I have never seen something of that magnitude happen in our city. It was a beautiful demonstration of hope, love, and resistance against operations that felt authoritarian, that felt unchecked and unbalanced and not accountable for. And it was really nice to not only see young people step up to the plate and lead these peaceful protests, but also see volunteers and neighbors who were not Latino, who were not immigrants, protecting the storefronts of small businesses, going around reporting CBP sightings, as well as ensuring taking kids to school, right? And ensuring that parents are safe and also delivering groceries and uh, needs to families that were too scared to leave their homes. It was not surprising, but it was beautiful to see. And I didn't think, I oftentimes I spoke in front of city council. I told them Charlotte has really been a political city, but the moment met us, and I think the people of Charlotte and Mecklenburg County really met the moment and stepped up to the plate.
You did mention that at a time that voters seemed aware that city council could only do so much in terms of the response to CBP's presence. With that being said, do you think the city, the state, Democrats in Congress, even Republicans in Congress, did they respond adequately to the presence by Border Patrol in Charlotte?
I think that press statements and press conferences were well received. They were welcome. But I do think that as local entities, we can and should do more for our immigrant communities, right? We are public servants. Our duty is not only to serve the public, but is to protect the constitutional rights. It's honestly to protect the Constitution of the United States, of our state of North Carolina, and we can do more to ensure that though that constitution is protected and well served. I do certainly believe that we did have a small win, which is city council approved short-term emergency funding of $100,000 that would support um, the organizations on the ground helping immigrant families and support them with rent and utilities because these folks didn't go to work, right? They were too scared to. However, I do think there is more to be done, not only from the local government level, the state level, but also from our business community to support the small businesses that were impacted, as well as nonprofits to help us mitigate the impacts, the negative impacts that have caused this. And oftentimes, I'm really talking about the 31,000 CMS students who didn't attend school that week, as well as how can we start talking about the solutions to mitigate not only the economic devastation that these operations cause, but also the mental, emotional, and physical trauma that they did not only to elders and adults, but also to young people and little children.
I want you to respond to the Border Patrol throughout that week was often saying in national press interviews that they were there after the most dangerous criminals and that they were just picking up people who were undocumented there that were happening to be in the same room or same vicinity of serious, dangerous criminals. What do you make of that claim from CBP?
That's simply not true. I mean, we saw in the first 2 days when they arrested around 80 people, and out of those 80 people, they made a release where they only identified 7 or 8 violent criminals. I don't think they're after the most violent criminals in our city. Listen, I do agree we need to take violent criminals out of our streets, but not at the expense of innocent people that are just seeking a dignified life in the United States. After all, we are a nation of immigrants. After all, we do have the Statue of Liberty that says, "Bring me your tired, bring me your poor." And we should be a welcoming nation. And they simply are not targeting criminals. There is a lack of communication and transparency from CBP, from federal agencies, and from this administration on what they're actually seeking to do. And we cannot lie. They're not seeking to find the worst of the worst. They're seeking to disrupt lives and make this a political game to gain points.
One city council member can't solve the issue of immigration. Everyone agrees the system is broken. You have experience with it, your family has experience with it. Where should the conversation start when it comes to somehow beginning a road, a path to a better immigration system?
Well, I said it in front of Manolo's Bakery at a press conference a few weeks ago. This is the result of 20 years of failed promises from both parties, from the Democratic Party and the Republican Party at the national level, that continuously promise comprehensive immigration reform and relief to folks that have been this country, have been doing things the right way. There is no clear legal way to become a US citizen in this country. And if there is, the backlog is over 30 years. And when people now we're seeing immigrants who are doing it the legal way go to the courtroom and then get detained and abducted afterwards. So for the Republican Party to say, we like the immigrants that do this the legal way, well, you're not respecting the legal process, you're disrupting it, and you're causing more chaos than actually finding solutions. We saw this during the last presidential election, where the Congress came up with a comprehensive plan that was supported by both Democrats and Republicans, but it was not passed due to calls from within the presidential campaign of the Republican candidate. And it didn't fail to pass. And so I oftentimes have to ask myself, and I encourage voters to ask themselves, do we not want a solution to a problem we all know exists? A broken immigration system that doesn't value legality, that doesn't value due process. And that is really the pain point of all of this, is that it is a direct result of failed promises from both parties for the past 20 years on providing immigration relief to immigrants.
For that week, East Charlotte and most of the city was on national media for days at a time. Now that cameras have left and it isn't part of the news narrative of the day, what should folks know about East Charlotte, the folks that live there, and the community as a whole?
Well, I said this during a vigil, honoring the people that were abducted unfairly and that are still detained and haven't been reported on. I said, don't let this be the last time you come and visit East Charlotte. We are more than this. We are the most diverse part of our Queen City. We are predominantly Black, predominantly Latino, predominantly immigrant, and proudly so. We have a lot to offer. If you drive down the Central Avenue corridor, you will not only run into Colombian, Mexican, Honduran, Salvadoran restaurants, you'll run into Ethiopian restaurants, Palestinian restaurants, Vietnamese. You will run into so many cultures, and that is what we have to offer to the world. We are a working class community. We're hard workers, we're diligent, we're honest, and we're also resilient. And we have so much to offer. East Charlotte has natural preserves in our district. I think two or three natural preserves in our districts. We also have incredible parks. We have great attractions. We have so many amenities, and people, when people want to support East Charlotte, continue to support it, regardless of whether there are cameras or immigration enforcement in our community. It is the best way to show solidarity.
Council member, we'll leave it there. I appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you so much, Andy.
Welcome back. Despite a legal challenge as well as criticisms from state Democrats, a judge in North Carolina recently ruled that a new congressional map for the state can be used for the 2026 election cycle. We spoke with Dr. Chris Cooper over at Western Carolina University about the impact this could have on the state's political landscape. Why did we start seeing states redraw their maps?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple, really. Donald Trump asked them to. And so this really began in Texas. Donald Trump said, look, I would like to get some more Republican seats out of Texas, like to be able to hold on to that. U.S. House of Representatives, state of Texas said, I think that's a great idea. State of California said, well, not so fast. We're not going to let you have the only funds. So they jumped in. They decided to gerrymander for Democrats. We had Missouri jump in. We had North Carolina jump in. Now there's some conversation about perhaps Indiana. They just released a map, and on and on and on. But really, it all started, as so many things do in American politics today, with Donald Trump.
Was this idea of a mid-decade redrawing unheard of before, at least without a court order, that is?
Yeah, pretty close to unheard of. There are two times in American history, the recent American history, where folks have tried to do this at all. Not in North Carolina either time. It was one time in Georgia, one time in Texas. The courts jumped in one of those times and said, you can't do this. But I think what we really learned, well, one of the things we learned throughout this tit for tat redistricting war is that the, so-called ban on mid-decade redistricting was really a norm and not a law, right? There really was nothing preventing states from doing that. And so now they've realized we can do this whenever we want to, and they are.
So, of course, North Carolina was one of those states that redrew their maps. We saw them focus on the first congressional district down in eastern North Carolina. Why was that the one that was looked at? What's the backdrop there? Why choose that district?
Yeah, I mean, I think this one is pretty clear. They chose that district because it was the easiest one to flip. The first congressional district, represented by a guy named Don Davis, who's a Democrat, who's really a pretty moderate Democrat by every metric we have. He was representing this swing district, this district that had gone, it sort of stayed in Democratic hands, but could very easily have been a Republican district. And so the way it was drawn before, it was the only toss up district, not just in North Carolina, but the entire United States Southeast. So they targeted that district because it doesn't take a lot to move a swing district into a solidly Republican district. And that's exactly what they did. They shuffled voters who happened to be Democrats and happened to be African American Democrats predominantly from the first district into the third district. The third district essentially could handle those Republicans and still get a Republican win. And that's how they got essentially two Republican districts out of one swing district and one Republican district.
Now, we saw a court rule in favor of the maps for North Carolina. A court ruled for Texas differently, ruled not to use those maps initially. Why different rulings there? What happened there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, different judges is obviously one reason, but I think the bigger one is they're different states and different circumstances. So, one of the key pieces of evidence they used against the legislators and against the maps in Texas was a Department of Justice letter. So, essentially, the Department of Justice had written this letter to Texas saying, hey, we don't like your majority minority districts or your majority influence or minority influence districts. We think these are bad. We think you should get rid of them. Notice that that was not about partisanship, that was about race. Then, when you turn to North Carolina, we saw kind of the same dance going on where the plaintiffs were saying this is about race, the defendants, the legislators were saying it's about partisanship, but there was no DOJ letter. There was no smoking gun that said, hey, we're doing this because of race, not because of partisanship. And so I think ultimately that's why, that in Texas, the court was able to say, hey, we think this was motivated by racial considerations. We have some statistical evidence, but we also have evidence from this DOJ letter. In North Carolina, the court said, we're kind of not buying the statistical evidence here, or also don't have any smoking gun like that DOJ letter.
Now, we've mentioned it's up to judges and ultimately justices if this were to reach the Supreme Court, but could both these cases go before the Supreme Court eventually, or would that be one case? How would that fall out?
The Texas case is almost certainly going to go before the United States Supreme Court. They've already said that they're going to look at it. So for Texas, yes. For North Carolina, my guess is it won't. Now, my guess has been wrong on redistricting before. It's a moving target here in North Carolina, but the filing deadline has already started here in North Carolina, right? So on December 1st, we actually were able to go ahead and allow folks to register for office. We had 11 people decide to run for Congress just yesterday on December 1st. So North Carolina might be a little bit too late, essentially. If they was to go to the Supreme Court, it would be more about precedent, not really about the 2026 election, which I think at this point, we're under these new maps.
You mentioned incorrect guesses. Don Davis was expected to run somewhere else. He's running in the first district where he was before, this new redrawn district. Was that a surprise?
Yeah, to some degree, I think Don Davis had said, he probably would do that. So what's really interesting about Don Davis and about that decision is he represented the first district, lived in the first district, right? Well, not only when they redid these maps, did they change the sort of partisan makeup, they actually drew Don Davis out of his own district. Don Davis lives today in the third congressional district, but he is running in the first congressional district. There is no law that says that's not okay. So essentially, they are allowed to do that, and you're allowed to run in any district you want to as long as you live in the state of North Carolina.
Is he fighting a losing battle?
Probably. He's probably fighting a losing battle. I mean, if there is not just a blue wave, but a blue tidal wave, perhaps Don Davis is able to pull this off. He does have some roots in the district, but this district was drawn this way for a reason, and that reason was to get another Republican in office, to get Don Davis the heck out of office.
And lastly, is this the future of elections? Could we see more and more maps being redrawn in tighter timeframes?
Yeah, I think we could. I think it has sort of been ramping up cycle after cycle after cycle. And now that we've learned you could do mid-decade redistricting essentially whenever you want to, and the court has said, even in Texas, right, where the court said, we don't love these maps, they said it's fine to do it mid-decade. That was not the problem. The problem was that it was about race. So, yes, I think that legislatures are going to take the cue that they can redraw maps whenever they want to, and we're going to need to get more and more used to this just constant churn of districts.
All right, Chris Cooper at Western Carolina University. I appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you to Council Member J.D. Masuera Arias, as well as Dr. Chris Cooper for joining us on this edition of On the Record. I'm Chief Political Correspondent Andy Weber, and we'll see you next time.
Queen City News Plus. Just search Queen City News on your smart TV's app store.